Good morning, everybody. Just got a few people still hopping on this morning. Happy Friday. Morning, John and Jessica, Wayne. Good to see everybody. It's been a really good week this week. A lot of exciting stuff happening in the WZ world. A lot of great training programs this week. We've had some human resource training programs, adult protective services. We've had I know Wayne spoke at a university this week. I had a chance to speak at an undergrad class this week. I've had some law enforcement training, so been a really good week from a training perspective, which is really exciting. We also had a good week in the criminal justice system. So for those of you that haven't really paid attention, there was a case this week down in Texas, Melissa Lucio, that I had a chance to review her interrogation, and Melissa was scheduled to be executed on Wednesday, and had a stay of execution as the court reviewed her appeal. So that was really great news, especially for those of us in the interviewing world, making sure that interviews and interrogations are done the right way. So that's been great. Um, we had Administrative Professionals Day this week, so a shout out to the entire staff at the WZ team for making sure that we're in the right place at the right time and all our clients are taken care of. So thank you to all of those that work at the WZ team to make sure things happen. Yesterday, the NFL draft kicked off. So the Buffalo Bills, of course, drafted a stud out of Florida and kicked off their Super Bowl run for this year. So that was good. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, which brings us into our topic today, I thought, really cool opportunity to talk to Cecilia Fielhoy from Netflix's The Tinder Swindler that I talked to earlier this week. And so if you haven't seen this, if you didn't get a chance to log on with us live this week, we recorded it. So you'll see some communication come out from via email or from our social media team probably later today. So you can go back and watch that recording. And that's really what I wanted to talk a little bit about today. For those of you that are listening, I'm curious if you had a chance to watch the webinar. Looks like Jessica did. If you watched it this week, my discussion, not really a webinar, but my discussion with Cecilia, what takeaways you might have had, what kind of things that maybe interested you. And I was going to cover a little bit about that this morning. Really, the whole goal of that conversation was to understand what happens to the interviewee, right? The person that we're talking to during a conversation. And for Cecilia's case, if you're unfamiliar with it, she was a victim of financial crime and particularly a romance scam. And so we talked a lot about what is it like to be a victim? What's it like to be investigated, to have to tell your story, to be vulnerable? And it really got me thinking that oftentimes as interviewers, we're talking about what do we do to prepare and strategize for a conversation? What does the method look like? But oftentimes we forget what impact does our conversation have on the person that's sitting in the room. And there's a couple notes I took from my conversation with her that I think we can take into any one of our interviews, whether it's with a suspect, a victim, complainant, or a witness. One of the biggest things that I walked away with is I just wrote the word down, empathy. And we know empathy, we talk a lot about this in our interviews, is making sure we show understanding and we show empathy for what maybe somebody's gone through. But I think also understanding, having empathy for the immediate situation, right? Think about whether it's a suspect, a victim, a witness, a complainant, whoever it might be, having to talk to an investigator, whether you're in law enforcement, you're in the private sector, isn't typically something that people are looking forward to. And when we get to a point of where we're actually going to conduct an interview, it's probably at a person's maybe lowest point psychologically in this investigation, right? Maybe a victim, they've been victimized, they've relived this experience, they're nervous about a conversation. By the time they actually come forward or talk to somebody, might be the most difficult point in their process. A suspect, right? Same concept. They may have felt confident or prideful in what they've been doing or gotten away with for a period of time. And once they enter the conversation is probably their lowest point psychologically. So having some empathy, not just for when people make bad decisions, but empathy for the situation itself, right? So things like, hey, I appreciate you coming in and talking to me today. Or sorry, this is the room that we're in. This is the only thing that was available. Or for those of you doing remote interviews, sorry I couldn't be out there to talk to you, but we thought this was the best way for us to have a conversation as quickly as possible. But acknowledging maybe the uncomfortable part of the conversation, acknowledging maybe awkwardness or the anxiety that comes with the conversation. For those of you doing remote interviews, right, even acknowledging how much you hate staring at a webcam, or if you're in person and you have to wear a mask, maybe acknowledging that, having empathy for the discomfort is important. The second note I had jotted down was types of questions. And we talk a lot about this in our newest training programs, but making sure we're asking open-ended questions, fact gathering, investigative type questions. A lot of times leading questions not only are bad from an investigative standpoint, but can also project blame or bias right onto the subject themselves. Cecilia was discussing gender biases, right? So in her case, she ended up maxing out credit cards and taking on loans and all of these different types of things to facilitate, as a victim, this financial crime. And so investigators are talking to her, or even if a friend talks to her and says something like, "Why would you do that?" Right? Even these types of questions. Well, what were you thinking when you did that? Project blame, right? Cast blame. And I want you to think about that for those of you conducting sexual harassment investigations, workplace violence, bullying, sexual assault, financial crime, whatever it might be. The way that we question a victim or a witness might incidentally cast blame or judgment, which, by the way, will impact other victims coming forward or reporting information to you. And then the third thing that I thought was a really good takeaway is what happens after an interview. Right. A lot of times, especially those of you on the call, I see a lot of the names here are folks that conduct tons of interviews. And so what happens is, we have an interview scheduled at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and it just becomes almost like a conference call, right? Yeah, 1 o'clock interview. After 2 o'clock, I'll be done. I'll go on to something else. And we do so many interviews that sometimes you lose sight of the human interaction and the experience that you're about to have and the impact of that conversation on the other person. And so having some understanding that once that interview is over, whether it's an employee who gets terminated for theft or fraud, it's a witness who may feel nervous about retaliation. It could be a victim or complainant who just shared with you some vulnerable experiences of their life, or even in a criminal case, maybe somebody is arrested afterwards, right, or is maintained in custody afterwards. There's a lot of different fears that come with that. So thinking about what is our role and our responsibility as an interviewer. So in the private sector, are you utilizing your human resource partners? Are you utilizing maybe an employee assistance program? I've had a lot of interviews where at the end of the interview, we may have to offer some type of support for a witness or a complainant or even a suspect to make sure that their mental health is stabilized. So I want us to start to think and be kind of cognizant of when we leave that room and you go take your lunch break and you call the boss afterwards about what interview you just had, is there still another person that we impacted in that conversation, even if they were guilty of something? What's going through their mind? What's going through kind of their experience? Now, we've got some great content we've added to our training in the last couple of years. And thanks to Brian Barlow if he's on, but Brian and John Guzman also has some great experience with trauma-informed interviewing. And we think about the same thing, right? We don't want our subjects to have to continue to relive that trauma. So making sure we're aware of that. But I thought those were some good takeaways from this week. If you hadn't had a chance to listen to the chat with Cecilia, my challenge to all of you is to be a little bit better and aware of the impact on the interviewee as we move forward. John's talking about, good points, especially with remote interviews. I think one last point here, and I'll let you all get kicked off on your Friday. When we do remote interviews, think about how many people on your team are uncomfortable on video, whether it's just on video or it's using technology. And if so, they're already uncomfortable, right, knowing how to mute or unmute, knowing how to turn their video on or off. They don't even know how to double click on their computer or whatever the problem might be. If they're anxious with the technology, they're not going to be comfortable with the interview. So kicking off interview with almost a dummy's guide to Zoom or Teams or a tutorial on, hey, here's how you mute and unmute. Here's how we use this program. I'm not too comfortable with it either, but trying to break the ice and show empathy for maybe their difficulty with the technology. So hopefully that's helpful. Kicked you guys off on a good Friday. I'm excited for NFL draft the rest of this weekend. May starts this weekend, so we've got the summer just around the corner. We'll have more of our coffee breaks before class kicking off next Friday. Just a couple things, if you guys aren't aware, we've got a lot more classes being scheduled in person. So we still have our virtual offerings, if that's something that's of most interest to you, but we've got some classes coming up in New York City, in Houston, We got 2 classes in New York, an HR and a private sector class. And we're going to continue to put some of these on the schedule going forward. We got Baltimore coming up in June. So stay tuned. We'll hope to see you all in a class soon. Have a good Friday. Randy, go Browns. Good luck. You need more than good luck, but you know that. Have a good weekend. Thanks for joining me on Friday, and talk to you guys later.